watching The Swingmen, presented by the 94 Feet Report.
All right, welcome to The Swingmen. We're live on a Thursday night. We are 3 games into the NBA Finals now. Our last show was following a dramatic Game 1. It's a 3-0 series. Golden State is up, following a slightly less dramatic but still exciting Game 3. I'm joined by Corban Ford, Josh Cornelissen, TJ Burns. We have Alex West, our producer. Same crew as last week. So let's get right into it, guys. We're off to a bit of a late start here. Talking about Game 3, and don't worry, later on we are going to get into the Brian Colangelo stuff. We have a lot of interesting takes on that, but I want to start here with Game 3 and with Kevin Durant. Durant last night had probably, or I'd say easily, the best game he's had in the finals. He scored 43 points on 23 shots, including, I saw a stat that said he hit 4 shots from beyond 30 feet, which is more than any team has hit in a playoff game in the last 20 years. It was just best shooting display I've ever seen from Durant, arguably from anyone in the finals game. So let's start by talking about that. I mean, Corban, where would you rank Durant's performance compared to Game 2 when Steph Curry actually set the finals record for made threes with 9, and Game 1 when LeBron had 51, 8 and 8 in an overtime loss?
All right, so I'm going to come off slightly biased here, but I would rank in order LBJ first, KD second, Steph Curry third. Kevin Durant was phenomenal. He was just hitting shots. I think he missed 8 total. Just getting it from a variety of areas. That his deep jumper was going in, as you already mentioned. On 34 jumpers, just to carry on that stat. Yesterday he was 3 for 3. Before that, since joining the Warriors, before that he had been 2 for 17. So he was just hot. I mean, everything was going down, and you really can't do anything about that. Even more so if you have a rather porous Cavs defense that they already had, where there was already not really a good matchup for him individually. So I would have that second. I feel like LeBron just scoring 51 in spite of the different schemes and just a better defensive team that the Warriors had, which feels kind of weird to punish KD by scoring that much on a worse defensive team, but I'm going with it. The fact that he was able to rack up that much against different looks and against different players, you know, playing all game and having length from Durant and savvy from Draymond Green, and you just have Klay Thompson all over you. I thought that was something noteworthy and obviously number 1 in my opinion. And Steph Curry's was good. It was just one of those games where, I mean, I'm not going to lie, when I first saw it, I was sitting there going, wow, I thought he had already, made it. Like, he already hit 9 threes in the game before in a finals game. It just kind of happened, kind of snuck up on you like, oh, wow, there's the record. And that's not to negate anything he did or the historical significance or anything of that matter. But it just wasn't like, wow, this dude's taking over. He just had like a Steph Curry game and happened to hit 9 threes. He was like 9 for 17. Like, it just happened to be a finals game. And I don't know if that's just overlooking Curry's greatness or whatever it is, but it wasn't that impactful to me. It was like, wow, great.
Yeah, I kind of got to agree with you. Things that was really interesting to me was how pedestrian it felt, but I think that's something that you have to take into account with Curry, that this extraordinary performance, this beyond anything we've ever seen before, I mean literally, because he hit 9 3-pointers, has become the standard for Stephen Curry, that he can go out, he can play this well, he can shoot this well, and we just sort of, I mean, we were talking about this in pre-show, how much that when he hit those threes, we kind of just both said, like, really? That was the record? I thought he already had that. And that kind of effort from a player, while I think LeBron's game was more impressive, and I definitely think Durant's game was more impressive, that speaks such volume about who Stephen Curry has become over the past 3 or 4 seasons, that he can have a game where he literally breaks an NBA Finals record, and we go, wait, didn't he already have that? I mean, I just think that's so impressive, and I think that's... I have this big thing. I think Curry's the most important Warrior, but I don't think he's the best Warrior. And I think that there are little moments that just sort of play into that. And last night, or Game 2, was that moment. Now, that doesn't take away from LeBron's Game 1, which was probably overall, honestly, one of the most impressive, if not the most impressive NBA Finals performances I've ever seen. A 51, 8 and 8. Nobody in my lifetime has ever done that. I mean, Shaq had some pretty amazing games against the Nets, against the Pacers in those really early 2000 series, but I can't remember such a force of nature as LeBron's game 1, and then obviously Kevin Durant's game 3, where he just showed that he's the best scorer in the game, and that three-pointer, that dagger that he hit, basically 365 days later, after game 3 of last season, he's one of the great scorers in NBA history, and he's one of the greatest scorers in the game today. And all 3 of these games have significance to me. But you ask Simon whose game has been the most impressive, and I think we're all going to walk away from this, for better or for worse, remembering J.R. Smith's game 1 more than anything else.
Yeah, that's certainly true. And you guys both bring, we assume Steph probably had the record already because we're just so used to him. I mean, 9 threes in a game is nowhere close. I mean, Steph's done that, I don't know how many times in his career. I would guess close to 10 at least. So it's kind of par for the course for him. He also had a really poor shooting game from inside the arc. He was like 2 for 10, I think, from 2-point range. So it really wasn't Steph Curry's best performance, which shows the standards we hold him to. But he has played better. You could even argue had like a better all-around game outside of the scoring in game 3. He was really locked in defensively. He was rebounding well. Okay, you both said LeBron. Josh or TJ, either of you have a case to make for Durant here? I mean, so 51, 8, and 8 for LeBron in game 1 on 32 shots. Durant had 43, 13, and 7 on 23 shots in game 3. Is there an argument for that being a better game?
So I actually would make that argument. I think Kevin Durant had the best game of the NBA Finals thus far. 43, 13 rebounds, 7 assists. No player in NBA Finals history has ever matched those totals. Now, no player has ever had 51, 8, and 8 either. So, of course, we want to give props to what LeBron did. But what was most important for Durant is, 1, his team won that game. 2, he had a positive plus minus. LeBron didn't. He was, playing incredible basketball, but it was while his team just couldn't keep up defensively. Durant was dynamic defensively, which you don't usually say about him. But after a game 1 performance where Durant was anemic on the defensive glass, he has rebounded incredibly well the last 2 games, and specifically in game 3 when he had 7 rebounds after the first quarter, and Golden State, the rest of the team, 0. Kevin Durant had all of their rebounds after 1 quarter because he was dominating the glass and he was giving his effort on that end, which he hasn't always done. And the Warriors, they needed that effort because Steph Curry was, I think, 1 for 14 until he hit 2 shots late in the game. Klay Thompson only scored 10 points. The Warriors really needed Durant to be the offensive engine, and he was that and then some. And it didn't matter what kind of defensive coverage the Cavs threw at him. He just beat it. And that he got to that final play where he hit that dagger 3. That's the kind of shot that you look for a star to make. And for Durant, it was almost like you knew he was going to hit it. You knew he was just sizing it up, and he did his move, and you watched the Cavs botch the switch because that's what they did all game long, and Durant just nailed it. And I think that was the cherry on top of the best performance we've seen thus far.
I had the best performance for many of the reasons that Corban and Alex had said, but I do want to give some praise and add some more comment to Durant's performance, which was incredible and just so much fun to watch. He was pretty much the opposite of whatever Jordan Clarkson is. Every time Kevin Durant took a shot, I thought it was going in. He's mastered that sort of Dirk Nowitzki fade away, stick his leg out, shoot over that's in, you just can't defend it. But, Durant has better athleticism and length. And then probably the most wild part about it to me is that Kevin Durant doing that is probably plan B or C for the Warriors. Steph had a really poor shooting night, which is rare. But, the Warriors typically don't have to rely upon KD scoring 43 points. That is contingency plan C of just sending him out there and just murdering everybody and taking everyone's lunch money. So that just speaks to how incredible the Warriors are. But again, I would say the main reason that LeBron's performance is more impressive to me than Kevin Durant's is that, LeBron was playing against the Warriors, one of the better defensive teams in the league, and Durant was playing against the Cavaliers, who are, I think, the worst defensive team in the league. So that's how I feel about it.
So you bring up an interesting point about Durant doing that being the Warriors' like C option, TJ. I got the feeling last night, and I've gotten little glimpses of this feeling before. I think that Kevin Durant almost thrives more when Steph and Klay are struggling. When those guys are going, Durant's shots kind of take the team out of the offense, and I think he's cognizant of that. I don't think he's like unaware that that's something that's happening. It's just the way he plays, and I think he thrives when it's like, KD, we need you to take over tonight. That's what we saw in Game 3 last year, and it's what we saw in that game. The Warriors, I don't remember what the record is, but I think they didn't win a game this year when he went for over 40. It was like they were like 0-5 or something with Kevin Durant scoring more than 40 points. Someone can maybe check that, but I don't think that speaks to Durant's aggression hurting the Warriors like a lot of people have made it out to be. I think it speaks more to when the Warriors are struggling, KD goes into that mode where he puts the team on his back, and sometimes it's not enough. Last night it was. So the Warriors are up 3-0 now in the series, and barring something historic, which we've seen in this matchup before, they're going to be the 2018 champions. With that said, first of all, I want to talk about Finals MVP before we get into some of the implications of the Warriors winning this series for both teams. Does LeBron have a chance, number one, if this ends in 4 or 5 games, or let's say it goes 7? Like, if the Cavs lose, does LeBron have a chance at this thing? And if not, are you going with KD because he had the great Game 3? Do you think Steph? I mean, I think KD is clearly ahead of Steph right now if you look at the series stats. Does Steph have a chance to come back in this thing? Is it pretty much locked up? Where do you guys lie on Finals MVP? We'll start with Josh on this one.
I think with Finals MVP is more than the regular season MVP. It's really narrative based. I think that's why you had Andre Iguodala winning the MVP back in 2015, because you had LeBron putting up these great numbers, but he was inefficient. Iguodala was playing great defense. And when he went into the starting lineup, the Warriors all of a sudden broke off 3 straight and unleashed the death lineup on the league. It was all about narrative, not who had scored the most points in the series. And so I think that's why it's still wide open as far as the Finals MVP, because we just spent 20 minutes talking about which player's big game was the best, and we all made reasonable cases for 3 different players, because 3 different, we have 3 games with 3 different stories, each supporting a different star. And so if Game 4 is a dominant LeBron performance and he brings them back and they make this maybe a little bit of a series, push to 5-6 games, maybe another overtime game, who knows? But like, there's momentum enough where LeBron, with another dominant performance, could throw his name back in the ring. And Steph Curry has the signature Finals record from Game 2. If he has just a crazy shooting night in Game 4 and the Warriors sweep them, he could be the MVP. I do think Kevin Durant is in the lead. I think that he has been the best player consistently through 3 games. I think that he has had a positive impact in all 3 games. He scored well in all 3 games. So I think that he has to be the MVP thus far, but I do think it's still wide open.
I feel like probably going to be KD. There's a difference here between should and will. Last year, LeBron probably should have won. And there's probably LeBron's last. That's probably, I don't see, he hasn't been better this finals than he was last finals. He led in every single box statistic category. And he hasn't matched that quite. So I really don't think LeBron has much of a chance, because if it was going to happen with him on a losing team, it would have been last year. So it's like Josh said, it's much more of a narrative thing, and the narrative isn't exactly in his favor this time. So I do think it's going to be KD.
I think that you're correct. The thing that I disagree with you about is the year that LeBron had the best case, and I think it was the year that Love got knocked out by the Olynyk injury with his shoulder being separated, and then Kyrie went down in Game 1. Because honestly, in that series, LeBron's best teammate was Matt Dellavedova. And you can sort of take that for what you will. He had a really good year that year and had to be carried to team plane or whatever when he got those cramps. But I think that was the year where you got the valiant loser, the guy who just sort of overcame all these odds and played really well. I think that was 4-2. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong on that series. My problem with the LeBron narrative for this series is that it's a sweep, and the most valuable player can't lose 4 straight games. And while LeBron's been impressive, he's been amazing. That I think that the concept that the first 2 words of the award are most valuable, and the most valuable player is the player who's contributing most to the wins. And I mean, maybe that's just my personal opinion of it, but you have to contribute to your team winning games. And I just don't see a path for LeBron James to be the most valuable player in a 5-game series, in a 4-game series, whatever this ends up being. Now, that doesn't take away from the excellence that he has achieved. And I think that, honestly, what I've seen from LeBron over the past 3 or 4 seasons is one of the best runs. I mean, it's probably the best run that I can remember. I was a little bit too young on the early Jordans, and I remember the second run. But this whole past 3 or 4 years has just been so phenomenally impressive with the caliber of teammate that he's had, all these things. LeBron James is obviously one of the most impressive NBA players, but I think in this instance, there's just no way you can really responsibly say LeBron James has been the most valuable player in this NBA Finals.
Does anyone have anything else to add on this? Corban, who's your MVP right now?
I was gonna say I agree with all the Alex case, and yeah, it does look bad in light of a potential sweep come tomorrow night. But as good a case as LeBron did for the 2015 playoff run, finals run, I think he's done even. It's hard to say he's done better with a worse squad, but the fact he kind of got them to this point, which is why I propose that, I've heard this before, they have like a playoff MVP and then a finals MVP, because in that case you can differentiate the two at least a little bit better, in which case LeBron James would be my total playoff MVP, even with the teams that he played in the East, because the Cavs were just the Cavs. The only reason why it's even a conversation halfway is because KD and Steph, Steph Curry, after the game he had yesterday, it was horrible shooting performance. I forgot the exact number, but he hasn't. Neither of them have really.
I think.
Oh, there we go. Something like that. 1 for 10 from 3. I'm not saying that you can't bounce back and win MVP from that, but it's been up and down for both of them. Like, I feel like Durant and Curry, to a certain extent, kind of, I don't want to say cancel each other out, because that's just like the easy cop-out way to say it, but it's kind of like Durant scored more and been more clutch, I guess, at certain points. Curry's obviously more valuable. Do you give it to him for not, for winning, like you said, narrative? Do you give it to him for not having one in the previous final runs, maybe the Iggy MVP? Do you give him this one? Do you give KD another one because of what he's done in the finals and not how he almost submarined the Warriors, in the Rockets last 3 or 4 games? I don't know. I would say LBJ, but that's because that's me. Honestly, if I'm going to be honest, it would be KD. Only because, like you said, the narrative's there, and that performance is the most recent. Probably going to stick with us more. The whole, oh my God, same shot he hit last year has really just come off the tracks with all the questions that he's got in the press conference. So I guess it would just be KD.
I want to cut in just 2 seconds here, Simon, and I apologize to show in this way, but LeBron said in his media availability today, he said,
"Oh yeah,
everyone's trying to figure out how to beat the Warriors. How do you put together a group of talent, but also a group of minds that is able to compete with Golden State and able to compete for a championship?" And that's something that I really noticed last night. Obviously it was on display in games 1 and 2, but in game 3, I think that the Warriors showed something that you don't see a lot. Is not only they're the most talented team, but they're also the smartest team. They make these quick reads. There was a specific play, and I was looking for it a minute ago, and I just couldn't find it. I didn't have the patience while I was producing the show, but it was a Steph and Draymond pick and roll, and Draymond slips the screen, and he gets behind everybody, and he throws an alley-oop to JaVale McGee. And in that situation, what had happened is they had run the same play earlier, and Love had just sort of slid underneath it parallel instead of stepping into to hedge on Curry. He had slid under it parallel because he knew that Draymond was going to slip the screen. And what happened was Curry just, on that screen, he just came over the top, so Love had to stop penetration. And they make these reads so quickly and so efficiently that they're doing the best film work. They're doing everything. They're doing these tiny little things that are necessary to win it. And I think it's unpopular to say. I mean, obviously the Warriors are not fan favorites among people in the league because they're so dominant and all these things. But this is a team that is intellectually just performing on a level that it's very hard to say that I've ever seen before, because they play so smart, they play so fast, and they always make the right play. And I think that when you talk about this Warriors team, that's something that you have to bring up is how well they play the game on a cerebral level.
Yeah, I mean, the Warriors, for everything people say about defense, the individual brilliance in isolation from Durant and Curry, I think passing is their greatest skill. I mean, everyone they play is either a well above average to elite passer, or is Klay Thompson or JaVale McGee, who can just like finish everything, is like an elite finisher of plays that others create. So I agree with you, Alex. I also want to say that the stat that stands out to me, and I'm not going with Steph for MVP right now, but the stat that stands out to me from this series is that Steph Curry shot 17 threes in game 2. Forget the 9 that he made. The fact that he shot 17 is a testament to both how bad Cleveland's defense was and how good Curry is at doing those little things to get open. Most of his misses, I mean, I think a lot of his makes were the tougher attempts he took in that game, and a lot of his misses were wide open. And if he's getting off 17 threes in a game, he got off 10 last night, he's consistently getting over 10. That's just a bad defensive strategy, and you could make an argument for him with that, but he's going to need to put up better raw numbers to do this thing. So before we move on, guys, I just want to ask you, I mean, we kind of were talking like we assumed this might be a sweep, but Cleveland still is at home. Game 3 was a very close game. The Warriors last year didn't really come with the same fervor in game 4 up 3-0. Do we think this thing is going back to Oakland for a game 5, or do we think this is going to end tomorrow night?
I think that it could. It's a 45% chance, only because I really see Golden State probably remembering what happened last year and going, okay, we're just going to rip their throats out right here, right now. But at the same time, with Cleveland, especially against the Warriors, is really just dependent on the variance in their three-point shots. Game 4 last year, they hit, I think, 19 threes, if I remember, 15, 16, somewhere in that range. They hit just a lot of threes. And obviously they had just Kyrie Irving and his just dynamic off-the-ball scoring to really pick them up, because Golden State did get very close at various moments throughout the game, even though the Cavs had like a 15-point lead throughout most of it. But I could see the Cavs hitting a bunch of threes and then possibly sneaking away with one. Maybe LeBron does something similar to his 50-point performance, and they get just enough home cooking from the players as far as having their games in Cleveland. And Rodney Hood, and since his newfound freedom comes with even stronger performance, I can see that possibly happening. At the same time, I also think that Golden State will have learned from their mistakes and said, okay, we don't want to mess around with this. Let's just end it here. So 45% chance for me.
I think it's important. I think last year's loss, or game 4, was really important because the Warriors had a chance to send a message about how good they were, about how dominant they were. And I don't know how much they care about the narrative of it. Just they seem to be a team that cares a lot about winning. And I think that the sweep sends a message that this is the best team in basketball. This is one of the best teams we've ever seen, and they deserve their place in history. And I think that maybe it has a little bit more importance this season than it did last year. I'll be interested to see. I think the first 6 minutes of the game are going to be really telling in game 4. We saw it in game 3. The Cavs came out and they threw their haymaker, and they were only up about like 12, I think, in the first quarter, and then the Warriors got it down to like 1 or 2 before the end of the first quarter. And I said, that's not enough. It's nowhere close to enough. And I think that they need to hit one of those runs that they're absolutely capable of, where they rip off like a 25-5 run to start the game. And if they do that, then yeah, we might have a game 5. But if not, if this is a 1 or 2 point game at the end of the first quarter, we're going to be looking at a sweep. Legion of Boom.
All right, guys, I want to move on. Josh and TJ, you guys are 2 on the fence. Who's winning game 4? Cavs, Warriors?
Warriors.
Warriors will celebrate their title at Morton's.
There you have it. So I want to move on to some of the implications of this series, guys. With the Warriors, Alex alluded to it. Like, their place in history is looking loftier by the day. I mean, 3 out of 4, that's dynasty territory. I don't really think that you can call it anything else. It's a rare feat in NBA history. I want to start there before we get into some of the more dreary stuff about what's going to happen with LeBron James and what a sweep does specifically to LeBron's chances of staying in Cleveland. But let's start positive here. What would this championship say about Golden State as an all-time team? Whoever wants to take this. I mean, maybe not everyone has thoughts on this, but I'd be interested to hear who does.
I'll jump in. No, go ahead, Josh. Go ahead.
I think when you look at all-time, there's utter dominance and there's longevity. And I think what the Warriors have right now is the opportunity to really push into the dominance. They've been in the finals 4 times in a row. They barely lost one, and they won another one, their first one, and then the last 2 appear to have been won very dominantly. And so I think that puts them right up there with teams like the 3-peat Kobe Shaq Lakers, with the Celtics in the 80s. I think they passed teams like the Miami Heat. But I think they still need to prove they have the longevity to be able to just continue to win year after year after year and not succumb to, fatigue or, expense or the disease of more. And that's where you have teams like Jordan's Bulls or the Lakers in the 80s, or if you want to go back to Russell and the Celtics, although I think they're special and unique enough that it's really hard to compare them otherwise. But I think a title here is going to put the Warriors right up there with anyone's 4-year run. But I think they need to win another 3-4 years, be in the finals, be in the championship mix, win a couple more titles to put their name up there with the Showtime Lakers or Duncan Spurs.
Yeah, those are the 2 exact names that I was – is that there are 3 teams that are ahead of them. And I sort of ostensibly set aside the Russell Celtics because of the small league, all the things that happened. Obviously, 1962 was the weirdest year in NBA history. So all that aside, I think the 3 teams that are still ahead of them in terms of historical precedent is the Bulls 6-8, the Spurs 4-9, not really counting 2014 because then it becomes 5-12 or whatever, and then the Lakers 5-9. So you get when you have those 3 things, what you have is, like you said, you have excellence and you have longevity, and the Spurs proved it. MJ's Bulls proved it, and then obviously the Showtime Lakers, and their run was a little bit. I don't know. I guess I sort of put the Spurs and the Bulls on the same timeline because it never really felt like there was a really nice foil to those teams. Like, obviously, you had the Spurs and the Pistons, but you never really had I think the Showtime Lakers is one of the really great, as much as it pains me to say it, it's one of the really great franchises of all time because they had that natural foil in Larry Bird and the Celtics. Like the 86 Celtics is one of the all-time great teams, and consistently, whether or not you count the 86 finals, yeah, if you don't count the 86 finals, which Celtics fans certainly do, count that as a win over Magic and the Lakers. This was a team that won 5 finals and 9 runs, and that's really, really tough, and they did it against a quality opponent. So I think that no matter how you look at this Warriors team, we have not yet seen a team that is a natural foil that sort of rivals them in terms of talent and intellect, and I think that's a big contrast when you compare them to the Lakers. Now, if you put me on the spot and I had to rank them, I'd probably say the Bulls are 1, the Lakers are 2, the Spurs are 3, and the Warriors are 4. But I don't know. I'd have to really think about that.
Well, one of the tough things about ranking this is that the concept of greatness is a narrative-driven thing. One thing about the Warriors is that at no point during their run have they had the best player in the league, which Jordan's Bulls, you had the Lakers. And so it's just a weird thing. They put this team together to beat Goliath, and they've done it. But LeBron sucks so much air out of what should just be an utter celebration of their greatness that the narrative won't ever quite be the same. I actually do think this Warriors is the best, most talented, smartest run of a team ever. But I don't know that history will treat them that way.
I do have a question for that, though, Tita. Do you not think that and I hate to say this, but that was a hell of a year. I mean, I thought that year that he was the best player, and mind you, I'm a LeBron fan myself, and again, the narrative carrying the team and everything, but Steph Curry was on fire at least in 2015. I thought, like that stuff that season that he did was just wow.
I don't know of many people outside of Skip Bayless who actually said that Steph Curry is a better basketball player than LeBron James. They had a lot of people saying that Steph Curry had a better season, which he did. LeBron didn't have a great year, but I mean, he was still the best player in the world.
I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying.
And I mean, that's an interesting argument. Remember what people were saying. I remember hearing a lot of Steph is the best player in the world back then. I also lived in the Bay Area, so it's very
context matters. That was good.
Context does matter. And look, even if people were saying that, everyone stopped saying it after the finals that year. So I get your point, TJ. Although I think that could even work in the favor of the Warriors. Like, if we're talking about greatest team ever, to do it without that player is in a certain way a testament to how great of a team they are. But this is an endless debate that can go on forever, and certainly we can have more of once the series is over. But let's move on to the Cleveland side of it, because LeBron James, as you know, he had 4 years in Miami. He's had his 4 years in Cleveland. They've been a little less successful than his 4 years in Miami, and those 4 years weren't successful enough to keep him around. He has a lot more allegiance to Cleveland. I mean, I don't need to lay it out too much. This has been the talk of the entire year, really. But if this thing ends in a sweep, guys, does that change how you feel about the Cavs' prospects of keeping LeBron? Let's start there, and then we can talk about, like, you know, a little bit where you think he might be looking right now, especially in light of what's going on in Philly.
I think that it does. Obviously, Cleveland's went through a lot of turmoil this year, several roster changes. LeBron's been the one constant, played every game that Cleveland's had astronomical numbers. Cleveland went and took a great gamble at the trade deadline, basically rehauled their whole team. Many people were big supporters, myself included, of the trades, thinking that it was a good infusion of young talent that sets them up to win now and possibly for the future. And the playoff run kind of really put a big downer on that. And to get swept and to not really have had any game that they were close in, except, well, yesterday in game one. Game one was their best chance, and to have that go away because of team internal errors, I think those are strikes against you, especially when, you know, by all accounts, and again, I remember referencing this with the Sam Presti argument, the moves in themselves seemed pretty solid. It was just the result that didn't work. But NBA is a result-driven league, you know? And if that didn't happen and you have the best player in the world and he's trying to win and he's dragging teams to the finals and they're not even putting up a fight there, and when they are, they're self-destructing, I don't see how that doesn't count against you. And so, I mean, if they won a game, maybe two, then you'd say, okay, you know what, we can fine-tune this and that. At this point, there's a lot more questions and there's a lot more uncertainty. And so I would be just a bit worried. I mean, the only thing going in my favor is I don't see a plethora of valuable options that LeBron can go to, and I'm sure we'll touch on that later. But, yeah, I'd be a little bit more nervous. We'll see after Friday. And
I think we should get into that in a minute. But you made an interesting point, Corban, about if, you know, they won another game. See, maybe we do a few tweaks here. Do you guys see LeBron as that type of thinker? Is he the optimist who's going to say, oh, we made it to 6, I actually think we can beat this team? Or is he more of a pessimist, some might say a realist, and say there's no chance I'm beating this team? I don't care how close it is. The Warriors, when push comes to shove, are going to beat us every year. Do you think that the games actually matter to him in that way?
I'm going to go. Go ahead, TJ.
Overestimate at this point in LeBron's career how much he actually cares about winning. It matters, but I think it's a secondary or, you know, third concern. He wants to be happy. He wants to make a ton of money afterwards, and he wants to be notable. I think LeBron is very much driven by thinking about his legacy, and he thinks of his legacy as something greater than rings. Rings are nice, but if he continues doing things as far as his ability to advance player rights, his ability to change the league, to become a billionaire himself. I think there are a lot more concerns than just winning for LeBron. And he basically has made a pretty solid argument that his mere presence on a team can bring pretty much any team to a finals berth. So at least in the East, and then in the West, he'll at least get to the conference finals. So I don't know that I really don't know how much team fit or winning is really much of a concern when, I mean, all evidence shows his mere presence can get you at least a shot.
I mean, I'm with you on that, TJ, except I'll be a little more concerned. This is going to be, I mean, if the Celtics were entirely healthy, I doubt Cleveland would be there. I mean, even be in the finals this year. So you bank on the East getting tougher, at least the top 2 or 3 teams, and then LeBron, obviously, and you said a lot. His legacy, he's kind of at peace with that. He's bigger than the game. He understands that there's a lot more bigger than the game. But to make the finals year after year, and not even this will be the second straight finals that he really hasn't stood a chance in. I mean, they came in with an all-offense roster and got ran off the court last year. And then this year they're going to get run off the court, and they had less offense than the year before. And so do you think he will be on a team as he gets older? He wants, ideally, I mean, LeBron's a paradox in that way, to have less responsibility and to have, more support. But being the way LeBron plays, that kind of, like I said, it's a mess. But to be on a team where, hey, he's a realist as much as we are looking at, and he can go, hey, I'm getting older. I do not have these superhuman years in me as I age, and this team is not going to be the bedrock to support me. What am I going to do? And so that's what I'm saying. But I get you, TJ. I'm just concerned if, he obviously the finals and winning rings may not be super, super high, but I do feel that him being successful in getting there consistently is. And with this Cavs team, as it stands and what it could possibly be moving forward, yikes.
See, I'm going to take the opposite approach because I don't think this Cavs roster is as bad as it. If the pieces can come together, I don't think it's as bad as it looks right now. This is a roster that got put together in February on the back of the we got a blanking squad game where they beat the Celtics, and it kind of got overblown like what the quality of this roster was. But in truth, this is a team that tried to understand how to switch, how to cover for each other, how to do everything on the fly. They had to absolutely retool. And if you can come back with a Rodney Hood and a Larry Nance and the number 8 pick in the draft, like. I think there are distinct camps for LeBron. There's the mogul camp where you go to LA, you learn from Magic, you do that. There's the mercenary camp where you go to Houston, where you go to San Antonio, you go to Philadelphia, and you're just kind of the most talented player on a team that's already good. But then if you sort of narrow those down, if LeBron's going to be a mercenary, then the world is his oyster. But if he's going to sort of maintain some control of his legacy and want to do things his way, his options get distinctly more narrow when you think about it. It has to be LA or it has to be Cleveland. And while this Cleveland roster has been bad, I certainly think that there is a path forward when they have a training camp, when they have a chance to learn one another, when they have a chance to learn how to switch, because Josh touched on this earlier. Switching has been the absolute Achilles heel of this defense. They're not a good defensive team anyway, but the Warriors and particularly Kevin Durant and Steph Curry have found where the soft spots are on the switches, and you saw it in that shot that Durant hit. Like, he was just waiting. He sort of did that skip dribble he's so well known for, and as soon as he got a little daylight, he just drilled that shot. And if you give it another year, maybe that switch happens a little bit sooner. So if LeBron wants to be a mercenary, then it's certainly possible that he can go anywhere. I mean, he could be a Boston Celtic next year, according to Stephen A. Smith, but when it comes to like thinking about his legacy or thinking about his contribution to the team that is the eventual downfall of the Warriors, there aren't a lot of places where he sort of controls his own destiny and doesn't end up in a situation with like Kevin Durant did when he joined the Warriors.
Go ahead, Corban. Let's close this out, and then I do want to move on to this Colangelo thing. But close the segment out because I think this is a great discussion.
No, I'm with you, Alex. You made very good points. The only concern I have is it's not even on the defensive end. It takes a certain type of player to, as we all know, to play with LeBron. And I feel that him in his search for more help, however he sees that, we all thought he had a blanket squad, and maybe this playoff run has made an imprint on LeBron that can't be undone. And that's my only concern with it, because yes, I think the pieces in a nutshell are good. I think Rodney Hood, if he had his confidence, was a very good player, but because of circumstances that may or may not have been out of his control, he had a very early couple of rounds, but they just disappeared off the rotation for reasons that still haven't been explained. We were playing Jordan Clarkson when he was clearly unable to really play. And it's because of other mitigating factors that I am a lot more concerned for LeBron, and that I do think you take the mercenary approach. However, Cleveland is, you have a good pick, you have young players, there is hope. So it's going to be interesting to look into this moving forward.
Yeah, and I think if LeBron does come back to Cleveland, it's to be a change. They may not be able to add another star. There's going to have to be a change in kind of structure and mentality, whether that comes from LeBron kind of just chilling out and embracing these guys and being a little more of a different kind of leader, trying to get them to play the way that the Cavs need him to, whether it's Ty Lue changing his approach, whether it's Ty Lue not being the Cavs coach anymore.
Whether it's hiring Brian Colangelo.
Right. How's that for a transition? Yeah, so man, is there any chance LeBron still goes to Philly with this Colangelo thing? There's a lot to get into there. Why don't we start just by kind of laying out what has come down since we talked about this last week? Colangelo was, I guess he resigned technically. Clearly not really many options for him. We can talk about how legitimate that resignation was. And it came out that it was supposedly his wife who was running all of these burner accounts. Again, a lot of gray area there in terms of believability. So let's just talk about like what we know now and what do we think of all this new information? I want to start with TJ on this.
So my first point would be something you allude to was the skepticism of the narrative that Colangelo is trying to say, where he threw his wife under the bus and then backed it over, then drove forward again over his wife. There's great reason to be skeptical that he had absolutely nothing to do with it. The report that was put out by the independent investigation that the Sixers had done by Paul and Weiss said that it was that his wife admitted to doing it, but they couldn't find more evidence because she did a factory reset on her iPhone. So Paul and Weiss doesn't say that Brian Colangelo had nothing to do with it. They said that the evidence only points to his wife, and the evidence is greatly limited when the wife does a factory reset on the iPhone. So there are a lot of things to be skeptical about with Colangelo, and nothing about it looks good. There are a lot of questions about the Ringer and how they handled the story and the degrees to which they've been vindicated as far as factual accuracy versus whether it is responsible journalism or whether they're a journalism website at all. But from a basketball perspective, it's definitely a shakeup.
Well, let's get right into that. What you bring up. I mean, we talked about the journalistic angle last week. That was something of interest to you. What do you think this says about the Ringer now that this is where we've arrived?
Speaking about it all day, basically, I likened it to when Kobe Bryant would take a shot with time running out when there are three guys draped over him. When he makes it, it looks good, but when you don't, it's kind of a selfish and irresponsible decision. So the Ringer basically had this story from an anonymous source that had to have been shopped to other outlets, and other outlets didn't pursue it. This source said if the Ringer wasn't going to run with it, they were just going to do a Reddit dump. So what the Ringer essentially does is all the legwork for this Reddit conspiracy thread and post it on their website under the guise of journalism. Now, the fact that it happened to turn out to be correct is irrelevant when you're talking about ethical journalistic standards. And it kind of goes to a larger thing with the Ringer's ill-defined presence of what exactly they are. They call themselves a media website, which which in itself is a vague term. They do some journalism, but it's mostly columns. Not to be too negative on The Ringer, which is a website I read pretty much every day and enjoy. It's essentially highbrow TMZ sports. It's gossip, columns with overqualified writers. But the main issue with the piece itself is that it took factual pieces of information, which is the data that there are strange coincidences between these tweets that happen to be correct. But the narrative, the framing of the story sort of imbued it with innuendo toward a more salacious narrative that drove the reader to the conclusion that it was Brian Colangelo, when it was kind of an irresponsible claim to make in the forum and form of which the piece presented itself to be, which was journalism as opposed to an opinion column.
My concern about this, and I had alluded to it earlier, and I just want to get into it now, is one of the big concerns that I had about this is that the Ringer was involved in the story. As an entity unto itself, it was involved in the story. They had this information that this guy was going to dump on Reddit, whatever. You can listen to the podcast, you can sort of make those decisions for yourself. But what they did was they injected themselves into the story. They held it until a moment, or they did whatever. And I feel like I don't want to speak ill of Bill Simmons. I mean, what he's done has been no doubt impressive, coming from a guy who was the Boston sports guy and just sort of this outsider and making himself basically a media mogul is incredibly impressive. But at the same time, I feel like he has a nose to get into the story as opposed to reporting the story. And it just sort of opens up like what the questions are about what journalism is, because on the one hand, rule number one of journalism is report the facts. And that is absolutely what the Ringer did not do with this story. They reported the facts, and then they were like, but also, could it be Brian Colangelo? And that was very heavily, there was a lot of innuendo in that, where it was just very heavily implicated that they thought it was Brian Colangelo. And that came out from the word go, from whatever night, I guess it's a week ago, maybe it was a week and a half ago now, but they implied that they thought it was Brian Colangelo from the word go, and thus they had injected themselves into the story. And then as the 24-hour news networks, as the news cycle we live in just sort of went, it became the Ringer reports that. And as a result, the Ringer was a part of the story. And, for better or for worse, like they were correct, and obviously Colangelo's been fired and all these things have come down, but it just seems to me that it's sort of irresponsible when you, in the times that we live in with fake news, all this political stuff, that when you report something, it should be a fact and you should not inject your own opinion. And TJ and I talked about it earlier. It's like, where does that Ringer live? They sort of live in that miasma of, are they a news network? Are they an opinion column? Are they the TMZ of sports? And, they're probably all of those things. And that to me is a little bit irresponsible. And I know like that's probably not a popular opinion, nor is it a ratings grabbing opinion. But the truth of the matter is I feel like that Bill Simmons and the Ringer got too involved in a story. They wanted to be a part of it instead of reporting what was.
Yeah, really interesting conversation here, guys. If Corban and Josh don't have anything to add to this, I guess where I want to close out is talking about the NBA implications here. So the draft is now 2 weeks away, from 2 weeks from today, and the Sixers don't have a GM. They have a lottery pick, and then they're entering a free agency period where LeBron James, among many others, will be targets of theirs. First of Brett Brown right now is the acting GM, so we can talk about that if anyone has any thoughts on that. But beyond that, first of all, when do they get a GM? Do they have to do it ASAP, or do they have to wait for the right guy to become available? Do they let Brett Brown kind of run things until that guy becomes available? And secondly, now that Colangelo is out, will there be a lingering effect, or have they kind of saved themselves from a potential disaster by hurting their chances of getting some of these top guys? I want to start with Josh on this.
Just to inject on that, like before you get started, Josh, one of the names that has been kicked around is David Griffin. That was a name that Zach Lowe reported today on his podcast, that David Griffin, there was mutual interest on that. So
I might just laugh.
Let that color your discussion, Josh, as you go ahead.
Yes, sir.
David Griffin comes, LeBron has to come, and they'll trade for Tristan Thompson, and they'll sign Mike Miller and something like that. But a little more realistically, I think what is important for Philadelphia to do is not get caught up in this summer. It seems like a big deal, and I'm sure it is. It's probably one of the biggest summers Philadelphia has had in decades, probably since the 80s. But what Philadelphia has to do is realize they need a guy in place for the long term. They can't afford to have anything mess up their long-term plan here. And so they can't go in for a guy like David Griffin if they're only doing that or primarily doing that because of a connection to LeBron James. One, we can debate whether LeBron James would be the best fit over a guy like Kawhi Leonard or Paul George or Jimmy Butler next summer. But LeBron's still incredible, and of course he would be a great signing. But more important than that, the 76ers have to decide who is the best guy to bring on for the long haul. Now, could that be David Griffin? Absolutely. I think Griffin made a lot of smart trades. He made some good signings. He did a lot of good things in Cleveland, and he's very well respected across the league. And everybody assumes that if it wasn't for Dan Gilbert's paranoia and refusal to pay guys more than a few years, that he would still be in Cleveland trying to help LeBron win another title. So I think David Griffin's absolutely a great candidate. We've heard Danny Ferry. He appears to have rehabilitated his image after his comments about Luol Deng became public and he lost his job with Atlanta. He's a reasonable option as well. I also think someone to consider, maybe he's better in a coaching role, but the 76ers did just bring on Monty Williams, who was serving as vice president with the Spurs. And he, I think, should be in the mix for some powers in the personnel department, even if not the ultimate GM. And then I think there's a lot of young guys around the league. Boston's assistant GM has been batted around, Utah's assistant GM. So I think there's some young guys out there as well that could be good options. But again, just Philadelphia needs to say who's going to be the best person to lead us for the next 4 to 8 years, not who's going to be the best guy to get big fish this summer. If they do that, I think they make the mistake.
And going off of what you said, Josh, would David Griffin necessarily be LeBron's GM again? I feel like, Griffin speaks very highly of LeBron publicly, as is the high road to take. It's the right thing to do for his career. He was the GM of one of the greatest players of all time. That being said, LeBron made his job extremely difficult. He put immense pressure on him every year. He forced him into win now moves. And ultimately, I think Griff has been taking time off looking for the ideal situation. I don't know if it is still the ideal situation if he gets LeBron. Do you think there's any merit to that? Like, would Griffin want LeBron, or would he have say in the team pursuing LeBron?
Directed back at me, I think that David Griffin has consistently praised LeBron. I haven't heard a negative word about LeBron out of Griffin's lips, and he's had a lot of media availability, podcasts, The Jump, other shows, and he seems to speak very highly of his relationship with LeBron. So I think if the opportunity was there to bring LeBron on, I think he would welcome it. I think he viewed LeBron, the pressure that LeBron gives you, as somewhat of a challenge. And look, Griffin excelled. I mean, he put pieces together. He propelled the Cavaliers that first year into the finals. The next year they won, and he got to celebrate the first championship for Cleveland. And so I think that he has a good relationship and enjoys being in the same organization as LeBron. And why wouldn't you? Because he's one of the best players to ever live. That being said, I think that if he goes to Philadelphia, that's not some sort of signal that he thinks he'll be able to bring in LeBron as well. It's probably just a recognition that the GM position opening up in Philly is one of the most attractive jobs to open up in my memory, because of just the young talent. You still have some assets. You're in the Eastern Conference. You've got owners that are willing to spend. I think everything's lining up for this job being really valuable.
I guess that's it. I guess he just put a bow on it.
All right, guys. Yeah, so certainly a lot to look at here in the coming days. Maybe we'll see Griff end up in Philly. Maybe some of these other candidates will emerge. I think the finals will probably be over next time we're on here. And regardless of that, we'll either wrap up the series or talk about an upcoming Game 7. And regardless of that, we're going to talk about the NBA draft because, like I said, the draft is 2 weeks away and it's on a Thursday night. So really looking forward to that, and talk to you all next time.
You're watching The Swingmen, presented by the 94 Feet Report.